Hello everyone, welcome to our masterclass today, project management and how to build a different type of consultancy business with Jon Blasby.
Hi everyone.
So for those of you who may not know us, ZIGURAT is an online institution. We have more than 20 years experience in e-learning. So basically we provide master's and postgraduate programs in architecture, engineering and tech management. And our mission is to inspire and educate the leaders of tomorrow, basically to have a positive impact on society and the planet. So we strongly believe education is a transforming tool. So our brand new slogan is Transform Tomorrow Today, as you know. So two of those programs related to our portfolio are the management course from the tech environment and the MBA digital transformation. So you can scan the code there and see more details. Both programs have a double degree from the University of Barcelona. And just a quick intro about Jon. Jon is the organizational lead at Castiel Consultants. He's visiting professor at ZIGURAT and at the IE School of Architecture and Design, and a board member of RIC Spain. So Jon has made a very similar presentation during our student week. It was very successful, so I hope you'll enjoy it as well. So well, without further ado, I'll give the floor to Jon. Thanks.
Thanks, Josefina. Welcome to you all. Good afternoon, good evening, good morning, wherever you are. Just to say that we're planning to sort of maybe spend about an hour with today's session, just conscious of people's diaries. I just wanted to give you a bit of an idea. And also, in terms of logistics, I'm going to share my screen. Obviously, it's a little bit difficult at time to see what's happening when I'm sharing my screen. So what I'm going to suggest was, I'm sure there'll be questions that comes from today's session. So if people can kind of hold them till the end, then I can stop sharing the screen, and maybe even people can talk as opposed to put them in the chat kind of thing, whatever's easiest. But I suspect there'll be some questions come up. Let me share my screen. And then we can get going. So hopefully you can see that.
Yeah.
And, just as a way of introduction, as Josephine said, I was asked to present at the ZIGURAT Student Week at the tail end of July. And it's great to have been invited back to talk to the ZIGURAT community again. But perhaps with that in mind, I just need to apologize to some people if there was people who were present at my presentation at the Student Week. Then today is very much a repeat of that. There's a few changes, but there's probably a little bit less arm waving as well, because it's on the screen. But for those of you who heard me during the Student Week, you may have a feeling of deja vu once or twice during the next hour. But hopefully, for those who have heard it before, it enables the things to sink in a little bit more. And then for those of you who weren't present at the Student Week, which is probably many of you, then hopefully you enjoy hearing it for the first time. And again, I'd like to thank ZIGURAT for the chance to speak about this topic. I think it's something that I'm very passionate about, and also which I don't think is being considered as much as it should be in both the business world and also the educational world. So I'm grateful for them to give me the forum to talk about it. And as Josefina said, today's title, Project Management and How to Build a Different Type of Consultancy Business. And for me, there was two things in that title. Should I talk about project management, or should I talk about how to build a different type of consultancy business? And I got around that by rewording that. And what I'm going to talk about today is how to build a different type of project management consultancy business. But equally, I'd like to add that this is relevant. What I'm going to talk about today is relevant for many different sectors or many types of organizations in the real estate sector, whether it's a design company, whether it's a technology company. Many of the things I'm going to talk about today are relevant for those types of businesses as well. So hopefully there's something for everyone to take away. But before jumping into the real topic, I wanted to reflect a little bit on my own development journey, because as I'll highlight later, personal development never stops. And for me, part of my recent development was discovering and becoming comfortable with the idea of being a leader. When I say leader, I don't mean a manager. There's definitely a difference between leadership and management. And when I say being comfortable, that was actually the most empowering element of it. Because I used to refer to myself as an uncomfortable leader. And the reason I kind of coined that phrase was for a number of reasons. One was because I was not comfortable with being associated with the idea of privilege that leadership sometimes implies to some people. You know, you be the leader, you get the biggest office, you get the most of everything, or the biggest whatever. And that didn't really sit with me as a person very well. I could also remember back to some of the leaders that I'd worked with, or perhaps they were more managers than leaders, but they were in a leadership position. And whilst I had the benefit of working with many great people, I also worked with some people that I wouldn't put in that category as well. And I was also not sure I had the skills to be the leader, and particularly the leader that I wanted to be, not necessarily the leader that everyone else was aspiring to be. Fast forward a couple of years, and I've now become much more comfortable with the idea of being a leader. I've still got a lot of development to do. I'm still doing that development. I don't think it ever stops. But I'm a lot more comfortable now with the idea of being the leader. But I still hang on to the term the uncomfortable leader, but now for a different reason. Through my leadership, and combined with my, how should I say, disruptive and sometimes rebellious tendencies, I now want to make people uncomfortable. And today, I'm going to hopefully make some of you uncomfortable by what I'm going to talk about today. So how am I going to make you uncomfortable? Well, I'm going to start by claiming that business as usual is broken. Don't always use that word, but anyway, it means the same thing. So, and whilst I'm not suggesting this is limited to the real estate industry, that's what I'm going to focus on today. Whilst that might sound uncomfortable, it's certainly not intended to be a criticism of the industry. In fact, I believe our industry is full of great companies, great people, in fact, doing great things. I think the problem we've got as an industry is the why that why we're operating, why we do what we do. And often we're operating simply to make money for our clients. That's what we're being asked to do. And actually, congratulations to us all, because I think we're very good at it. I think the real estate sector continues to make money for many people in many different shapes and forms. So in some respects, we're doing a great job. And as I say, I think the problem is the homework that we're being set to do, not the fact that we're not very good at it. So what is the alternative? Well, quite simply, it's to recognize that the financial capital is only one form of capital that we need to be enhancing. It's not the only one. And I'm not suggesting that people shouldn't be making a profit in their consultancy businesses or any business that they operate. But what I am saying is that any profit should not be gained at the detriment of other forms of capital, such as human capital, natural capital, manufactured capital, social capital. This is a model called the 5 capitals models. There are many similar theories around this, but as you can imagine what these mean. What we tend to do in our industry is focus on one, i.e. financial profit, at the detriment of the others, and the obvious one being the environment, i.e. natural capital. So what would that look like? Well, this is something that I posted on LinkedIn, it says 2 years ago. Quite when it was, I can't remember. At a time when I was doing a regular LinkedIn post called the Friday Reflection. Imagine what our industry would be like if the main driver was not money. Imagine if the housing developer determined the typology by local needs and not by maximizing the bottom line. Imagine if the office developer only focused on providing something the tenant wanted and adding to the local community and not making profit. Imagine if the student resident provider tried to match student numbers with empty bedrooms in the area instead of making money for the investment fund. Crazy, but imagine if it was not. Now, whilst I describe those ideas as crazy then, I increasingly think it's only a matter of time before the industry has a fundamental shake-up. Our industry is complicit in destroying our planet, exaggerating inequality, and creating a disengaged workforce. Whether it's too late or not, I don't know, but I'm confident that there are going to be fundamental changes to our industry in the very near future. And this extractive, profit-focused industry has also led to the typical consultancy business that we see operating. So as our industry changes, this consultancy will need to change as well. So what is this typical consultancy business? With money comes power and a feeling of privilege. Our clients who have the money also have the power in the project environment. Even though, as many of you will know, they're sometimes not the smartest people around the table. That feeling of power and privilege can often create a type of master-servant relationship with the companies that work for them. Obviously, there are exceptions to this statement. They're the smart ones. But this project relationship is one where the consultant is almost expected to feel grateful for the chance to work. And this master-servant relationship is then replicated within the consultancy business itself, and also at a project level, with the client expecting to speak to or see the boss or other senior people who are then responsible for passing the message down, maybe through different layers of management, finally to those people performing the work. This situation is compounded by the way people often get promoted within consultancies, with the best technical person often getting promoted to a position where their technical skills actually become a hindrance, and what they need is leadership, of which they've had minimal training. Ironically, when the client does want to see the boss about the project, that's when they can fall back on their technical experience. Indeed, most consultancy businesses are mini versions of the money-driven client, with their main focus being on financial gain, often for the owners or the managers. You see this with self-owned businesses who have not created a successful succession plan. So when the owner wishes to retire, the only viable option is to sell the business, often to the dismay of many of the remaining staff. The corporate version of that is the large publicly owned consultancy, where the share price drives short-term actions at the expense of long-term and sustainable growth. So when our industry changes, the consultancy businesses built around that model also change, what does this different type of consultancy business look like? Well, the first thing is to say this is not a quick fix, okay? And it will need a fundamental change of mindset. I say that because our industry's pursuit of profit and the consultancy built around this is not an isolated case. They are unfortunately the product of the extractive world we have created, and that we are conditioned to accept through parenting, education, and then business. The idea of competition, the idea of power, the idea of winner takes all. These are things that we've grown up with for many, many years. This mindset change can be described through the realization that we have to switch from extractive companies run on the principles of machine-based thinking to regenerative organizations modeled on living systems thinking. This is probably a masterclass in itself, well, more realistically, probably an entire master's course in itself. But I'll briefly touch on this concept today. At the moment, the standard operating model for most businesses is machine-based thinking. The natural evolution the natural evolution of management thinking from the Industrial Revolution, which was transferred into newly emerging consultancy businesses, where in essence people are treated like parts of a machine. Specialist departments being created, people doing one or a few tasks, and everything controlled and constrained by levels of hierarchy, otherwise known as managers or heads. The terminology that we adopt also reinforces this mindset with phrases such as move the dial, utilization, and even companies being referred to as a well-oiled machine. All things that we commonly use and commonly hear. But what we've ended up is a position where businesses are in a state of fear. Fear that they may lose some of their clients' money or get sued. Whereby an individual who perhaps outside work may have 3 children, a mortgage, could even join the army and fight in a war, needs their monthly report, according to the QA process, this is, to be reviewed and approved by 2 different people. A report that their client probably does not even read. A regenerative organization is created around a living system point of view that follows the principles of nature and treats the organization as a living organism. There are many different frameworks that support this pattern, but examples of principles that inform this process are holism, that the whole is greater than the sum of its parts. This is a way of considering the stakeholders affected by the actions of the organizations, your sub-consultants, your community, your clients, etc., etc. Interdependence, that there is an inherent value in all the relationships in the organization, and all those relationships should be maximized. Uniqueness, that everyone in the business is unique and needs to explore their own personal agency. You often hear people talk about fitting with our culture. But in some respects, fitting with our culture could be considered just another type of discrimination in your recruitment process. You end up getting the same type of people in your organization and missing that uniqueness and that opportunity that different people bring to an organization. Evolutionary, probably something that's a lot more easier to understand than it was, say, 10 years ago. But the fact that the organizations operate in ever-changing environment. Nothing can be considered as fixed, and everything should have the ability to evolve. So if you create a process, you can't say, okay, we've done it, we've now got everything solved and moved on, because that process is probably not going to be applicable in a year's time. Nodal, decentralized and distributed, such as the ability for all people to make decisions. And developmental, growth and health of all the people in the organization. So that's the old typical consultancy, and that's the new consultancy. How can we compare them, putting them side by side? Well, I'm going to use this model here, which I'm going to come back to later on, but I think it's a great way to sort of start to understand what the difference is between these 2 types of organization. So from profit to purpose, as I said, it's important that a new consultancy business makes a profit, but it's not the only thing that should be considered. So caring for and enhancing other types of capital beyond simply the financial capital. Hierarchical pyramids to a network of teams, removing those layers of control and letting the power of teams emerge. Particularly relevant for project managers when we work in team environments on all our projects, team environments that are continuously changing, that are different for every team. So the idea of developing teams in your own business can then be replicated to your project environment as well. Directive leadership to supportive leadership, providing the space for others to develop, make mistakes and learn, not just telling them what they need to do, giving them the answers for everything, but letting them evolve and letting them learn. Predict and plan to experiment and adapt, acknowledging that processes such as and your planning can often be unhealthy ways to create a false target that limits possibility. Rules and control to freedom and trust. Simply, people perform much better if they're trusted. And surprisingly, most people are good people. Central authority to distributed authority, allowing everyone to become leaders and allowing everyone to make decisions. Obviously, those decisions need to be made in an appropriate way, but as long as they do it in an appropriate way, then why can't other people make decisions? And then finally, secrecy to radical transparency. And this is about ensuring that everyone has the information they need to make those decisions. Not sharing information just because people like to know what's going on, but really making sure that people have got the information they need to make those decisions. So I've described this as a bit of a change of mindset, which, as you can imagine, is a big task. Well, it's a big task for most of us because as we've grown up and lived in an extractive world. Ironically, there are some leaders who have only known organizations based on living system thinking. They tend to be from or have some link to indigenous communities and have never been unwired from the natural principles that we are born with. And it was explained to me last year that some of them really struggle with the idea that regenerative leadership needs to be taught because it's actually just simply living by the principles of nature. But to give you an idea of what the transition could look like, I wanted to tell you a little bit about our company, Castiel. From the outside, we actually appear like a typical consultancy business. We deliver what I describe as international standard project management and cost management services. Ironically, both roles that have been developed to manage the risks to our client and protect their financial investment. We work for both local and international clients operating in Spain and Portugal, and occasionally we get involved in projects overseas. We work on many different building types and sizes, say from a 70 million data center down to a 500,000 fit out for a retailer, including offices, shopping centers, a little bit of residential, hotels, and sports facilities. However, on the inside, we're a very different company from most of our peers, and also from what we were a few years ago. It probably helps to see that through a brief timeline of Castiel, which I'd suggest falls into 4 phases. It started off with the creation. Colin created the company inspired by the frustration of big business and with the idea of creating something impactful. This period was probably characterized by delivering projects and for clients that arguably the company was too small to handle. It was continuously punching above its weight in those early years. The next phase could probably be best described as the development phase. This is when I joined Colin. Driven by similar passions and frustrations, we started to develop the business. If there was a characteristic of our approach during these early years, it was probably doing what felt right. We were confident enough and rebellious enough not to follow the crowd or follow the rules. And we were doing things such as working with coaches. Initially, Colin and I got a coach to help us too as a team. And then once we started to appreciate the benefit, we paid for coaching sessions for all members of staff. We now have 5 different coaches supporting the business in different ways. Understanding the importance of recruitment. I can remember a moment during this period where we paid for 3 people to travel to Barcelona, 2 from the UK and 1 from Madrid, to have a full day of interviews with Colin, myself, and other team members. And ironically, we didn't employ any of them. It's evident that our open and value-based approach to recruitment has brought some great people into the business and also ensured that we retain a diverse workforce. We tend to fluctuate between 50 to 70% of our staff being female. And if ever we have an equality problem, it's because we've got too many females in the business and not enough males. Promoting personal development. something we started very early on. And ironically, the success of this has also created challenges where, being a fairly small company, people felt that they would develop better if they switched to a different, often larger company. However, we congratulated their decisions and celebrated it, keeping strong ties with almost all our ex-employees. The relationship that the staff had with the business can be was demonstrated when, towards the end of 2022, an ex-employee asked to come back to Castiel, as they felt they were at a point on their personal journey where Castiel was the ideal place to continue that development. Transition. This is where we are now, and it's really the formal version of the previous phase. Whilst we were doing what felt right, we started to talk to people about our experiences. And whilst some did not really get it, others started to refer us to books, development programs, etc. And this enabled us to become much more intentional. Helped by a somewhat unplanned period of self-reflection during COVID, we formally announced our transition at the beginning of 2021. Taking inspiration from a great and a very simple book called Corporate Rebels, our transition is explained using the principles that I talked through earlier, from profit to purpose, from hierarchical pyramids to a network of teams, directive leadership to supportive leadership, predict and plan to experiment and adapt, rules and control to freedom and trust, centralized authority to distributed authority, secrecy to radical transparency, and finally job description to talent and mastery. As well as becoming more intentional, we also became clear on the why behind trying to transform a business that, up until that point and measured in a traditional way of turnover and profit, was already very successful. Quite simply, it was in response to the problems I mentioned earlier, destroying our planet, inequality, etc. Conscious that we could address these failings both at an organizational level and at a project level, we set off to affect the former in the belief that it would create amazing individuals who would then be able to affect the latter. And then finally, there's the evolution, which I've called the future. So this will start at some point, not sure when, but at some point during the transition, what I would describe as a tipping point. We can already see some great examples of individuals and teams developing their capability to self-manage, which at a certain point will mean the business is regenerating itself. And this highlights another point during the development phase when Colin and I agreed that we wanted to create a sustainable business, in the sense of a business that would continue to thrive without either of us being in the business. This alone is a fairly important realization and challenge, because at that point, the two of us were arguably the best leaders in the business, the best managers in the business, the best project managers in the business, and we held nearly all the client relationships, a typical hierarchical model that I explained earlier. The network of teams, or more accurately, a team of self-managing teams, is our answer to this challenge. These teams are now developing their ability to self-manage and the skills to perform all tasks a business needs, creating strategy, identifying clients, managing relationships, securing opportunities, managing team resources, and finally delivering projects, all underpinned by a focus on leadership development. Thinking about what I wanted to share with you today also reminded me of one important and inspiring moment. I think it was in early 2021. I don't remember exactly how the topic came up, but Colin and I were contemplating what would happen if Castiel did not work, i.e., if the transition failed. We both acknowledged that even if we could not achieve our objectives in Castiel, the experience of trying and possibly failing may be the catalyst for achieving it somewhere else. In short, we agreed that if this did not work, we would not return back to a typical hierarchical model. And at that point, we agreed there is no plan B. I started today talking about my role as the uncomfortable leader, and I wanted to return to that briefly. Given that many of you listening today will be students of ZIGURAT or ex-students of ZIGURAT or considering to become a student of ZIGURAT, I guess it's reasonable to assume that you all understand the importance of personal development. But I'd like to emphasize that that journey doesn't end when you finish your current course. In fact, I'd argue that's when it begins. It's at that point, with your new knowledge, that you can make more of a difference to the changes that our industry desperately needs. Due to the fundamental changes needed, the obligation is on all of us to stay on a development path, and that need is greater than ever. I've been in this industry for many years as a project manager, a cost manager, a team manager, a business manager, and now a business leader. During this journey, my personal development has ebbed and flowed, but I think it's fair to say that over, say, the last 5 years, my desire and passion to learn and experiment has not been greater. And as I develop my own ability to be a regenerative leader, I see my style of leadership evolving from a manager to a leader, from a decision maker to a mentor, and from an expert to a coach. So I'm going to conclude with a plea for all of you to become part of this change that our industry needs. As you return back to your daily work, either after this call or tomorrow, and I'm very conscious that you're dialing in from many countries, and that consultancy businesses are also influenced by local culture and custom. I'd ask you to start to take note of the behaviors of your clients and the consultants around them. Your journey from here can then be to observe what you see, to reflect on what you hear, to challenge, and then see how things can evolve. And finally become curious and learn the ability to learn. And now I'm going to open the floor for some questions.
Great, Jon. Thank you very much. So we have some written questions. Maybe you can. Does anybody want to maybe raise your hand and make an open question now? Go ahead. So, Jon, what do you mean by supported leadership? Can you share some concrete examples of how that looks like in a day-to-day basis?
Yeah, sure. Really, it's around giving people the space and the security to learn themselves. And what I mean by that is, if someone wants to, I'll give you a sort of concrete example where typically people would phone me up and say, Jon, what's your opinion? I've got this, I could do this, or I could do this. What do you think? And, what I said earlier about the managers in the business tend to be the most experienced technical people. It's very easy for me to say, well, I think the answer's A. Okay. But the truth is the person receiving that information doesn't learn anything. They just learn that one way to solve a problem is to phone up Jon and he'll give me the answer. But that's not help them when I'm not available. So the other way of dealing with that is to effectively reflect that question back to the person and say, well, what do you think it should be? And sometimes the person says, well, I think it should be A, and they know and they've considered that they just didn't have the confidence or felt that they had the power or the authority to make that decision. And sometimes they don't know the answer. So that's when you can explore it with them and kind of ask their opinion and help them understand it from a different way. So that's part of the supporting, is to give people that space to inquire and to explore, but also ultimately to give people the confidence that if they make a mistake, they're not going to be penalized. And that's something we, at times we use the phrase celebrate failure. I think sometimes that, not sure whether that's always the case, but we certainly accept failure and understand failure. But the most critical thing about failure is as long as you learn from it, then it's valuable. Obviously, if you fail and don't learn from it, but that's what really is that supportive leadership, is giving people the environment to explore, to be curious, and to feel that it's a safe environment where they can work without fear.
Okay, so there's a similar question here with Anna. How can one develop strong leadership and communication skills as a project manager to work effectively with diverse teams?
Yeah, good question. And that's probably another master's degree in itself, isn't it? I think it's a great topic to talk about in terms of communication skills. Obviously, it brings up this debate that's very relevant in project management around hard skills and soft skills. And the truth is, you need both. Personally, I think the emphasis is still too much on hard skills, because of the diversity that Anna refers to there in the question. We now work with diverse teams. If we worked with less diverse teams, then the soft skills would not be so necessary, but they are. And I think one of the things there is really it is a different type of training. It's a different type of understanding, and it's really about focusing on people, and understanding that any team is made up from a different group of people, and those people need different things. I mean, and it's just like doing a presentation today. It's some people want more detail and some people want less detail. Some people want it to be 3 hours long and other people want it to be 15 minutes long. And that's the challenge of a lot of what we do in a project environment, and I think a great example is report writing. Now, obviously, report writing is somewhere where, and it's a form of communication, where you can do both. You can have the executive summary at the beginning for the person who only wants to spend 3 minutes reading it, and you can have the detail later on for the person who's technically minded. And so, I think things like communication skill is as it says, it's a skill. It's something that needs to be learned. It needs to be something that's practiced. And like a hard skill, it's something that you need to train for. Obviously, experience is very helpful as well, but there is a flip side too, particularly when we talk about diversity. There is a flip side to experience, which can mean that you think you know everything, and you actually neglect that the diversity of what the people you're speaking to. I mean, obviously the younger generations are growing up in a much more diverse environment. They're studying in a diverse environment, so when they get to work, hopefully they're more conscious of the diversity of the people that they'll be operating with, where people my generation perhaps haven't had that benefit. And you see people making mistakes because their experience makes them think that they know it all, and in fact they don't.
Okay, so we're having more questions because as we have to deal with diversity and as of lately remote teams as well. So here Mauricio is asking, I'm struggling a bit with the tendency to organize projects around virtual teams, sometimes across different places and time zones. Of course, COVID accelerated this. How is your experience and suggestions leading in that context?
Yeah, and it's a sort of great time to be asking that question. I think initially when we all started to work remote, we all grasped the kind of the benefits of it. Whether it was being able to work from home. We delivered a program of projects across Europe pre-COVID, and we had someone on a plane for 3 months traveling around many cities in Europe, and then we had to deliver a almost identical program after COVID, and we done the whole thing virtually. I mean, the reality is we wouldn't have done the second one if we hadn't had the experience of the first one, or we wouldn't have been able to do it virtually. And I think we got to the point where we thought everything could be done virtually. I think we're now getting to that point where we realize that's not the case. I see it as something positive. I see it now as, now you've got the choice. You can either do the virtual meeting or you can do the face-to-face meeting. I think obviously if people are jumping to the conclusion that everything could be done virtually, then that's a mistake. If people are reverting back to the old way and saying everything must be done in person, that's also a mistake. So I think it's like any tool, you know, as a tool comes available, and the tool that we've got now is working remotely, then as long as you use that tool for the appropriate time and place, then it's a great advantage. If you use the tool in the wrong place, then it can become a hindrance. I'm just trying to think if there's anything else that Mauricio is driving at there. That, yeah. And I think, you know, you mentioned time zones, Mauricio. That's obviously nothing to do with COVID, but I think again it's one of them things that you know, COVID has, or the ability for us to work virtually has now minimized the problem of time zone. I think time zone used to be a greater challenge for us. But now that we work from home, people are more comfortable to have a call at 8 o'clock in the evening with the US, where, you know, 8 o'clock in the evening with the US when you're in the office was frustrating. So I think the virtual working, obviously the flip side of that is that we now work internationally more, because we can. But yeah, it's everyone needs to work that out for themselves in terms of their own project. But I think that the message there is the right tool for the right place is wonderful, but the right tool, the tool for the wrong place can be a challenge.
So John Salah is asking, is there any books or courses you would recommend to lead a project? Here, Paola is suggesting The Culture Map by Erin Meyer. I don't know if you know that book.
Yeah.
Do you have any more suggestions, or?
Yeah. With the question, sorry, the question was books related to. Sorry, what did you say?
Leader or project management, leadership or project management.
Yeah, I think, you know, and I think it's easier to find books around leadership than it is project management in a way. And I think the opportunity, because I think project management is still, and this is a generalization, but I think it's still struggling to really understand the benefits of the soft skills in project management. There are people now understanding that and talking about that, but in a way, I think it's more about books about leadership and how you can then apply them to a project environment, because a lot of the books about leadership or organizations are around understanding people, which I think is a great knowledge to then transfer into your project environment. Obviously, I mentioned the book Corporate Rebels, and it is a very sort of simple book, really well written, actually a joy to read, and quite short as well. And if anyone's kind of intrigued about this idea of you know, a new type of business, then that's a great place to start. There's another one called Reinventing Organizations, which is a far more detailed book about the kind of evolution of consultancy businesses and businesses. They also do an illustrated version of that, which is almost like the kids version of the adult book, if you know what I mean. But again, it's an easier book to because the Reinventing Organizations book is you know, quite detailed and quite heavy at times. There's another book that I really enjoyed reading a couple of years ago, was a book called Humanocracy, which is kind of the flip side of hierarchy, and it talks about how organizations work in a hierarchical organization, or how hierarchical organizations work, and the challenges that they create. And a lot of these books really focus on this point about creating amazing individuals and creating the environment for individuals to do wonderful things. And that's really the problem with this machine-based thinking, is that the individual becomes a cog in the wheel, and the individual is not given space to think. They're not given space to develop. They're not given space to even come up with ideas. And that's why, you know, the statistics demonstrate that so many people are disengaged at work.
Yes, and Mauricio here adds, that regarding the virtual work, the challenge is the life-work balance, because that's what you said. We end up having meetings at 8 p.m. maybe because we can do it, but then people are so.
Yeah, and I mean that's that I think with all these, there's two sides to all these coins, isn't there? So when people say working from home is great because I've got more flexibility, I can go to the shop, I can put the washing on or whatever. Then the flip side of that is where is the division between so it's something that everyone has to I believe everyone has to be given. If you don't give people the ability to manage that environment, then there's a danger it's not going to work. And I mean that in the sense of, and again, I can take our business as an example. You hear a lot of businesses now are saying, "Oh yeah, we do hybrid work," and I think I might even be talking about ZIGURAT here, so I need to be careful. But people say, "Oh, we do hybrid working," and you say, "What does that mean?" They say, "Well, we have to be in the office Monday to Thursday, and we have to work from home Friday." That's not really hybrid working. That's just working it's just having a regime that's a bit different to what it used to be like. And I think that forcing that type of regime on people can be difficult, because then it's like maybe that person doesn't enjoy working from home one day a week and actually want to go to the office, so that one day a week is actually really stressful for them because they're working from home, and other people might want to do more days at home. So I think that's the problem.
I'm just wondering, out of curiosity, Jon, in your business, do you encourage hybrid work? Do you have what kind of arrangements do you have with your employees, or just?
Well, we're the ultimate rebels. Okay, so we've got we've got no rules.
Okay.
And that's not always. Sorry, we've got no rules on where people work. Should I need to qualify that. There are certain rules. And that works in a lot of ways, but again, there are ways, that's not ideal, because people come into the office when they want to come in, but then sometimes people come into the office and they find there's no one in the office. But you see people adapting, because now people tend to go, next week I'm going to be in the office Tuesday and Thursday. Anyone going to be around? And then someone says, well, I was going to go in on Wednesday, but I'll go in on Tuesday. So it kind of evolves. It evolves. I mean, that in a way, that's the beauty and the idea of this sort of living system, is to say, don't prescribe a rule. Let a pattern emerge. And if we all end up working from home every day of the week and everyone's happy, that's wonderful. If we all end up coming to the office every day of the week and everyone's happy, that's wonderful as well. That's the point behind it, and that's it's a very challenging thing for a leader, because you kind of want to give people rules, you want to make decisions, you want to create processes. I mean, about the only process we had in the business going back was a thing about holidays, and even recently we've kind of ripped that up and said, if you want to take 5 weeks holiday in a row, you can, as long as your projects are being delivered and your teammates are covering you while you're away, whether you go away for 1 day or 5 weeks. Okay, there's a limit on how many days you can take. We haven't got to that, the point where some people say, unlimited holiday, which, again, I'm not sure whether that actually works in practice. But yeah, so we are flexible working. Other questions?
So, do you have any other questions? I don't think so. Oh,
say,
here, Francisco, I've got one. I think you first the question. Francisco, do you want to turn on your mic and maybe?
Or is he busy? Or is he busy typing it?
Yes.
Oh, he's teasing us.
Yes. A little bit of suspense.
Well, I hope it's a good question now, Francisco.
Yes.
Because
To raise the expectations.
Exactly.
Oh, okay. So if you raise, let me see, Mauricio, if I can open your mic. Oh, here you go. There, so you can speak now, Francisco. And if you want to turn your mic on or your camera, you can ask the question.
Thank you very much.
Hi.
I didn't find it. I would like to enter the consultancy business related to construction. I understand that this is the business that you operate in. And I was wondering, I was late to the meeting, maybe you already talked about it. I was wondering, like, how do you manage to carry on the activity, I mean, like oriented to sustainability in construction, when maybe the clients are like more resilient to accept the changes that you want to make, like they want to go more traditionally. I don't know if I'm being clear.
I think you mean more resistant to the change as opposed to more resilient to the change. Is that what you mean?
like they see the more sustainable options, like not cost efficient or like too expensive to take the risk. I mean,
and I think it's a great question, and I certainly haven't got the answer, Francisco, but I can, just to sort of explain a little bit of the sort of thought process that we're going through. And and I did touch a little bit on it in the presentation, in the sense that when we realized that as a business we were in a very extractive industry, and that we arguably are culpable as being part of that extractive industry, and we needed to do something about it, and as owners we wanted to do something about it, that was when we realized that there was sort of two ways to approach that. One was to do what you're sort of referring to there, which was, influence our clients and help our clients. And then the other way was to build a business that we felt was more attuned with that principle, and would create people who were then able to do it at a project level more. So we kind of believed there was two ways of approaching it. One was at our organizational level, and one was at project level. And because of the challenge you highlighted there, we decided to start with it at an organizational level, and then use that as a platform to kind of explore how we deliver it at a project level. And that's kind of where we're getting to now. So our mission is to bring collective success that goes beyond the project. Okay, and that really acknowledges this idea of the five capitals. So what we're saying is that we don't, if a client wants to make profit, okay, that's fine, but our mission is to create something in addition to that, whether it's a benefit for the community, whether it's a benefit for people, something that goes beyond that. And I think there's two sort of ways to approach that. One is to find the clients that are doing amazing things and try and work with them. And then the other one is to find the clients who are doing less amazing things and try to encourage them and influence them to do something better. And I think you have to focus on the second, as well as the first. The first is, in a sense, the easy win, and we're working with a design company based in Barcelona that's doing some amazing things, and we're collaborating with them, and that's all very good and rewarding. But we know that they're a very small kind of part of the market, and therefore the opportunity when working with them is quite limited. So we know we also need to work with the companies and the clients that are, shall we say, a little bit more resistant, as you say, a little bit more reluctant to start to look at projects in different ways. And it's, and I think there's no one answer to that. I think you just have to keep looking for opportunities, and it starts with the initial conversation with the client, making sure that the client is aware of the challenges that the industry faces. There are ways of encouraging clients by showing them success stories of other organizations. But also, I believe there's going to become a point where this is going to become a lot easier. I believe there's going to be a point where, and I referred to a tipping point in our organization, I think there's going to be a tipping point in the industry where people start to almost refuse to deliver projects that are destructive, or refuse to work for organizations that promote profit ahead of everything else, or even refuse to work for them. But in the meantime, we just have to keep looking for those opportunities on all the projects, and a lot of it is around conversation. We're now getting to the point where how can we find things within our clients' organizations that we can latch onto as an opportunity? How can we find something in their corporate accounts that say that they're going to be targeting something a lot more positive than what they've done in the past? And often the real estate people might not even be aware of that. So sometimes it's just informing them about things that their business is already saying. Also looking at how, when we work with international clients, we often look at what their company's doing in other countries, to see if we can bring that idea into Spain and kind of inspire the local people here to try and replicate what they're doing elsewhere, particularly in the where the headquarters of that company is often where they tend to do the better work. So you can take lessons from there. So there are little tricks that you can do, but I mean, at the end of the day, the point that you're making, which is very valid, is that our ability to deliver sustainable projects is constrained, or is limited by the inspiration and the aspirations of our clients.
Thank you very much. I get a good impression from this. Thank you.
Thank you, Francisco.
Josephine, I've also seen some questions in the
yes.
There's a Q&A as well, isn't there? But
yes. So Fitzum says there is a tendency of clients to lead the consultant. You should do this. You should do that. How do you face such a tendency?
Yeah. I think there's two sides to that. I think one is, well, how do I mean, I think that's the classic. It's the classic master and servant thing that I was referring to. And Fitzum, I'm not sure where you operate, but I've had the pleasure of working in many countries, and that tendency to dictate what your consultant should do is a lot more prevalent in Spain than many other places. And there does come a point where you can accept that to a degree, but what you do need to do is you need to know where the boundary is. And the way we approach it is that you're not employing a project manager, you're employing someone to manage your project. And we know what the difference is between, what the client says we should do and what we think we should do to manage the project. And we do sometimes get to the position where we say to the client, look, you've got two choices. We can do what you want, and it makes you happy, but your project could be a failure. Or we can do what we think we need to do to manage the project, which we think is the best chance of completing your project how you want it, but it might not make you so happy because we're effectively not doing what you think we should be doing. And obviously, client satisfaction is an important thing. No one wants their client to be unhappy, so there is a tendency to do what they say, do what they want to do it how they want to do it. But I think, and that's not necessarily wrong as long as you understand why you're doing it. We're doing it to keep our client happy. But at the same time, you as a project manager, you need to be very clear that sometimes something is to keep the client happy and something else is the way to manage the project, and they're not always the same. Okay.
So Fitzum, do you want to add something to that, Fitzum, or is that okay? I can open your mic.
Is that okay for me?
Okay, great.
Perfect.
So I think we don't have any more questions. I think that's it. So I'm gonna open my video. Okay, Jon. So thank you very much. That was super interesting. Thank you everybody for attending this masterclass. And as I said before, this is being recorded. So if you've signed up, you're gonna receive the recording by mail. And so you have the chance of reviewing this, or maybe seeing Jon's recommendations, or So thank you very much. Jon, thank you very much for your time.
Thanks everyone for attending and for ZIGURAT for inviting me and for the questions. Again, good questions.
Okay, bye. See you next time.